As part of Health by Design's ongoing commitment to behavioral health education, we present another lesson in our Fundamentals of Weight Management series. Here's the Medical Director of Health by Design, Dr. David Player.
Hello again. Welcome to our third session on energy intake. By now you should be reasonably familiar with fruits, vegetables, and grains. And today we're going to spend some time talking about dairy products, meats, and eggs. As we start that, I want to do what we usually do here, which is to review some of the basics about why we have to talk about energy intake here, because most people out in the world that you and I know don't have to spend very much time thinking about it, they just eat it. For those of us who have relatively low metabolic rates, those who burn, women who burn 8 times their body weight or below, men who burn 10 times their body weight or below, we have to pay special attention to this whole equation of energy output and energy intake. And we said our energy output is made up of our resting metabolic rate, which is about 70% of everything we burn per day, our thermic effect of activity, which is about 20% for most of us. We're trying to get it up a little higher than 20. And then the last is the thermic effect of food or digestion, which is about 10%. And again, we get that as high as it can be by eating higher protein diets. Now we've spent, as I said, 2 other sessions looking at energy intake. And today we need to spend our time then on this last segment of energy intake, which is items that are different than the grains and fruits and vegetables, because unlike those things, our dairy products and our meats have naturally occurring oil. And anything that has naturally occurring oil in it, you have to pay special attention to, because we're making major efforts to cut down on the oil in our diet. Now, we're going to still try to go with calories per ounce. And you have to understand that with dairy products, we talk about something different in ounces than weight. With dairy, we talk about fluid ounces for the first time. And when you go buy a dairy product, it'll always be equated more in volume, in pints, cups, so many fluid ounces. Whereas everything in the grains and the vegetables and the fruits, we talked about weight ounces. And you're getting very good at weight ounces in our laboratories. I want you now to have a sense of what a fluid ounce looks like. Now, fluid ounces, if you're talking about watery things like skim milk or that sort of stuff, of course, is exactly the same. A weight ounce is a fluid ounce. But if you have something like whipping cream, where you start with a liquid and end up with something that has lots of air in it, of course, a fluid ounce may take up this much space, but it has very few calories compared to the actual liquid ounce that it came from. So that's the first rule with dairy things. The second thing is we have to understand dairy products are labeled differently. You'll see some dairy things that will say low-fat dairy items. And low-fat dairy items are basically made with skim milk. They're made with milk that does not have any fat in it to start with. So that's low-fat. So you see anything that says low-fat, you know that it came from skim milk. So you could have low-fat cheeses, and I'll show you some of those, low-fat cream cheeses, and so forth. And low-fat cottage cheese. Now the third thing to remember is there's some dairy items that will be labeled light dairy items, sometimes spelled L-I-T-E. And light dairy items really aren't made with skim milk. They're made with regular milk, but they have a lot of water or air thrown in with them, so they are said to be light. The truth is that they're still made out of the same stuff. You just buy a bunch of air or a bunch of water, and somebody calls it light. So with that start up here, I want to go over now and look at each of these dairy items that are laid out on our table, and we'll talk about them kind of as we go. Let's start way over here to the right, and again, we're going to try to stick with multiples of 5, 10, 25, 50, and 100 and so forth, so you can have some landmarks to go by. Dairy products are a lot harder for me, and I guess it's because there are so many different items. I think the key point here that as we progress toward 150 or 200 calorie items per ounce, you're going to know that you're adding more and more and more fat to the basic protein solids. Now, first of all, dairy products are made of protein, water, some carbohydrate, and some fat. And it's important, again, as you look down at something to say, how much does that have? How much fat does it have? How much protein does it have? And I'll go through first and look at calories per ounce, and then we'll come back and look at protein per ounce, and I'll just give you a feeling as you go across of how much fat we're getting as we go. Now, way over here on the right, our lowest calorie item in the dairy group is skim milk. And skim milk comes in at about 10 calories per ounce. And so a standard 8-ounce glass of milk is going to be 10 times 8 or 80 calories. Skim milk is very, very low in fat, as you know. It has a very tiny amount. Now, we go on up the ladder then to buttermilk, and buttermilk has about 15 calories per ounce. Basically, buttermilk has no butter in it at all. It's not a very fat item. The butter has been removed from it. That's how you make buttermilk. So it's only 15 calories per ounce, so an 8-ounce glass is going to be somewhere around 120 calories. As you see, there are a couple of other items here at 15 calories per ounce. Plain, non-fat yogurt, Dannon back here, is 15 calories per ounce. And here we have some light yogurt, light regular yogurt, meaning that it has some water or some air with it. Both of these come in at around 15 calories per ounce, the same as buttermilk. Sitting out in front in a little dish here, I have some egg whites. And although nobody goes and just gets egg whites usually and calls it so many calories per ounce, because most of the time we do eggs. Most of the time somebody grabs an egg and says, I've got so much egg. But egg whites are about 15 calories per ounce as you see it. So if you happen to buy commercial egg whites or something like that and you dump them in, you can say that they're around 15 calories per liquid ounce. Now we move on over to some items that are about 25 calories per ounce. Actually, the next item that I'd talk about is whole milk here, and chocolate milk and low-fat milk. Low-fat or 2% milk is going to be somewhere between skim milk and regular whole milk. And whole milk is 20 calories an ounce. You double your skim milk to get to your whole milk. So 2% is about 16 or 17 calories per ounce. And chocolate milk is about the same as whole milk, somewhere around 25 calories per ounce, maybe 20 to 25. Now you see, though, there are a whole slew of other things that are kind of here in the 25 category. The classic that I go by, because I eat a lot of it, is low-fat yogurt, frozen yogurt. Here we have some Bluebell frozen yogurt over here, and there's all sorts of new brands out. And this stuff varies between about 20 and 30 calories per ounce. The non-fat varieties get down close to 20 calories per ounce. The higher fat items get closer to 30 calories per ounce. For government work, again, call it 25 calories per ounce. Down in the front we have some low-fat cottage cheese. And low-fat cottage cheese, this is a Weight Watchers variety. It comes in very close to 25 calories an ounce. We have some yogurt here that now isn't the light variety. Light, as I said, had water or air mixed with it. This doesn't have any water or air, so instead of 15 calories an ounce, it's up to 25 calories an ounce. Regular cottage cheese comes a little higher than the light. Regular gets up closer to 30 calories an ounce. And you just have to be aware that each of these things are sort of devised to hook the consumer here. The consumer has to be smart. You have to know what light means. You have to know what low fat means. And you probably have to read labels because there's just too much difficulty, too many items. Sherbet has a little bit more sugar in it. You'll remember from your grains lecture that we said sugar was a 100 calorie an ounce item. Therefore, sherbet's a little higher than low-fat yogurt. Most sherbet's around 30 to 35 calories per ounce. Now that gets us moving on over to the 50-calorie items. And you see here way out in the front of our 50-calorie items we have eggs. And eggs, if you open them up and break them, really are in liquid form 50 calories per ounce. The trouble is we don't take eggs by the ounce. We buy eggs by the egg, and we eat eggs by the egg. And if you order at restaurants, you eat 1 egg, 2 eggs, 3 eggs. So the truth is most eggs are around 2 ounces. So you could bet that although it's 50 calories per ounce, it's going to be in the neighborhood of 100 calories for a whole egg. And here we have a whole variety of eggs, some brown ones and some white ones and some big ones and some smaller ones. I think you've got to have a sense of how big is the egg you ate. And most of the time I'd call an egg between 80 and 100 calories. But if you're doing it by the ounce, you have to call it 50 calories an ounce. Now we have some other items here, and my prototype, again, I said my prototype for 25 calorie items was Bluebell yogurt, but over here my prototype is some kind of not too expensive ice cream. It's about 50 calories per ounce here for this Royal Maid variety. And what it means is that if it's not too expensive, it doesn't have too much fat in it. When you get over to some of the expensive varieties like Haagen-Dazs, they have to go on back over here in the 75 or 80 calorie per ounce range. So regular, not too expensive ice cream is about 50 calories an ounce, and then we go on up from there. You see sour cream here is at about 50 calories per ounce. And there are actually some light sour creams that again have air or water in them, but regular sour cream is about 50 calories an ounce. Half and half is half whipped cream and half skim milk, if you will. It's about 50 calories per ounce. That kind of tells you where whipping cream is going to hang out when we get there. And we have some Carnation condensed milk here, or evaporated milk, and evaporated milk is about 50 calories an ounce also. Now let's move to some of the higher fat items. At 75 calories, there are just a few things, and there's some screwy items here that I want to mention to you. The prototype at 75 calories for me are light cheeses. Mozzarella, which I have sitting up here in this dish, and then some processed cheese, which is about 75 calories an ounce. And the reason they are 75 calories an ounce is because they're made with skim milk. Cheeses that are made with skim milk are about 75 calories an ounce. Cheeses that are made with whole, regular milk are going to be considerably higher. So at least at 75, I think of light cheese. At 50, I think of ice cream. At 25, I think of frozen yogurt. Now, we got a couple of other things here. We have light whipping cream. What does it mean again? Light means it's whipping cream that's got some air or water mixed in with it. In this case, it's water. We've got an interesting item back here that's a spread that's made with oil and water, and the oil is 250 calories an ounce, like all oil is, but they have enough water in it that it brings it down here to 70% oil, and it comes clear down then to about 75 or 80 calories an ounce. Actually, somebody here is buying water with his oil and comes up with a spread to put on something that he'd eat, a piece of bread or something. So that really isn't a very good buy if you look at what you're buying. There's also some coffee mate here, which would show up in the dairy areas, but the point I wanted to make here is that this Carnation Coffee Mate has no dairy in it at all. It's made out of oil and some carbohydrate. It says no cholesterol, low in saturated fat, lactose-free. And the reason it's lactose-free is because it's not really a dairy product, and it really comes out closer to 100 calories an ounce. It's 75, it's up really 80 or 85 calories an ounce. Now we get to 100 calories an ounce, and 100 are really our cheeses. Here, if 75 was light cheese, then 100 is regular cheeses that are made out of whole milk. I have one piece here that's a light cheese, mozzarella, but everything else on this plate, the Jack and the Colby, the Munster, the Edam, all of these things, regular cheeses, are 100 to 110 calories per ounce, and are, relatively speaking, a high-calorie food. We have to be very skeptical of the amount of oil that are in them. Most people like cheese very much. It's a salty food that's cheesy, and it's one of those that some people actually get addicted to and eat very high amounts of. There's some other cheese items here. Philadelphia cream cheese comes in either the regular variety or a light variety. The regular Philadelphia cream is at about 100 calories an ounce. The light, that's made with more water, actually gets down to 80 calories an ounce, but I put them here together so again you can see the difference between light cheese and regular cheese. We have some processed cheese back here, some things that you and I would eat with bread or sandwiches. These are the ones that are wrapped up in individual slices. Again, if you read the labels, you'll see that they're very close to 100 calories an ounce, almost the same as all the other cheeses that are made with whole milk. Now, the one other item that I put here was heavy whipping cream, and heavy whipping cream is 100 calories per ounce. And the point I wanted to make way back at the beginning, here at 25 calories per ounce, we had 1 fluid ounce of whipped cream that really came from 1/4 ounce of heavy whipped cream. It's important there again to see that if you and I were to, nobody does this, but if you and I were to take real heavy cream and pour it out, it's 100 calories per ounce. If we whip it up, 1 fluid ounce with all the air in it is about 25 calories per ounce. So that covers the 100 calorie items. So if you have prototype foods, if there are things that you eat here, you have to kind of latch in on what those are and at what calorie level they stand. Again, for me, it was skim milk at 10, frozen yogurt at 25, ice cream at 50, light cheese at 75, and regular cheese at around 100. Now we go up to the 125 calorie item, and there's really only one, and I don't eat it. And again, if you eat it, you need to know it. If you don't eat it, you don't have to waste the brain power. But here we have sweetened condensed milk, and basically you have milk that has the water removed from it. That makes it go higher and higher in calories. In addition, it has a bunch of sugar in it. Actually, the sugar is only 100 calories per ounce, so the major issue here is that you have dehydrated milk. You're getting down to where you have a very thick form of milk at 125 calories per ounce. Now we're getting to some high-calorie stuff, and you can imagine how much oil is in the high-calorie stuff. The only item that we have at 150 calories per ounce is whipped butter. It really is a light whipped butter, and what's happened here is that whipped means there's air mixed in with regular butter or regular margarine. And so you're buying a whole bunch of air here at 150 calories an ounce, because the honest truth is that butter and margarine and that sort of stuff are all up here at 200 calories per ounce. Whether you buy it in a tub or a stick or whatever it looks like, it's 200 calories per ounce. It's really a pure fat item. The only reason it isn't 250 calories per ounce like oil, pure oil, is the fact that it has water mixed with it. So our highest calorie items are butter at 200, whipped butter with a bunch of air in it is 150, and everything else kind of spreads out back down to where you have a pure water and protein item. Now that brings us to a discussion of protein in dairy products, and I'll start back here again and give you some basic guidelines. Remember, a lot of people use dairy objects or dairy items for their protein, and that's good, especially if you're a vegetarian. People become lacto-vegetarians, and the reason they can do that is because dairy products as a whole have pretty good protein contents. Skim milk over here has about 1 gram of protein per ounce, 1 gram per ounce. So does buttermilk, so does whole milk, so does 2% milk, and so does chocolate milk. Therefore, 1 gram of protein per ounce kind of covers all of these items. If you wanted to get your lowest amount of fat per unit of protein, then you would drink skim milk or buttermilk or something that's really low. Low-fat cottage cheese and whole cottage cheese have about 3 to 3.5 grams of protein per ounce. They are better protein items, and all of the cheeses, you'll find out in a minute, have higher amounts of protein per ounce. The frozen yogurt and things like that have about 1 gram of protein per ounce. Regular yogurt gets to 2 and 2.5 grams of protein per ounce. Getting to the 50-calorie items, ice cream goes back to about 1/2 to 1 gram of protein per ounce because we're getting more fat and more water and more sugar. Eggs are interesting. Let me spend a minute on eggs. If you ate pure egg whites in one, I used to think of egg white as having about 3.5 grams of protein in it. But a whole egg has 7 grams of protein. Therefore, the yolk had another 3.5 grams of protein in it, and the whole egg has 7 grams of fat also. So you really, in an egg, in a medium to large egg, have 7 grams of protein and 7 grams of fat, and that brings you up in the whole egg to somewhere between 80 and 95 calories. So that's eggs protein. Generally speaking, you'd say that an egg, as a whole egg, has about 7 grams of total protein. We get to our higher items. Cheeses are very high protein items, and they have about the same number of grams of protein per ounce as they have grams of fat per ounce, unless you're talking about light cheeses or low-fat cheeses. The low-fat cheeses like mozzarella have 7 grams of protein per ounce, and so do the high-fat cheeses have 7 grams of protein per ounce. Therefore, if you had to choose a cheese, you'd choose the low-fat cheeses, the ones that are made with skim milk, because they have exactly the same amount of protein as do the higher fat cheeses. It's almost the same as skim milk, which has the same number of grams of protein as whole milk. Now, Philadelphia cream cheese sitting here has about 2 grams of protein per ounce, and therefore you can see that if cheeses are really made of protein and fat mixed together with a little bit of water, Philadelphia cream cheese must have a much higher fat content than do even the regular cheeses, because regular cheeses have 7 grams of protein, cream cheeses have 2 grams of protein. Whipped cream, heavy whipped cream, may have 2 grams of protein per ounce. Again, is not a very good protein item if one is looking at calories per ounce versus the grams of protein. So I think those are the major things to remember about dairy products. They're good sources of protein, but they have variable sources of fat, variable amounts of fat per ounce. And we who have metabolic rates of 10 and 8 times our body weight have got to be very cognizant of where is the fat. So I want you in your laboratories, that'll be coming in the next couple of weeks, to spend a lot of time looking at what is a fluid ounce, which items have the high calories, which items have the low calories, which ones have more fat, and getting an estimation, if you plan to use dairy items as protein sources for your diet, getting an estimation of how many grams of protein are in these things. Okay, now I said we were going to go to meats next. And meats are interesting. They've been one of our major foods for years. They have been my major source of protein throughout my life as I've analyzed what's in my diet. And when you talk about meats, you have to start first by considering 3 or 4 basic characteristics of the meat. Now I have several cuts back here that I want to go over with you. I hope you can see this okay. Basically, we have 3 pieces of beef here sitting in front of us. And the first thing one always has to consider with meat items, whether you're talking about beef, pork, chicken, or fish, or lamb, or any wild game, you have to think first of all about whether the meat is prime, select, or choice. Prime, select, or choice. What is the grade of the meat? And when you and I go to a restaurant, we often get prime beef. And I have a picture, I have an example of prime here, and if we can focus closely on this, you'll see that it has a lot of marbling. There's a great deal of fat throughout this meat. And in this one, which is choice, we have somewhat less, but there's still some fat in it. And in this one, which is select, you'll see there's about the same amount, it looks like to me. Generally speaking, as you go from choice to select to prime, you can add about 10 calories per ounce, or 1 gram of fat per ounce. So if this particular piece of beef was about 75 calories an ounce, this one would be 85 calories an ounce, and this one would be 95 calories per ounce. So before you ever think about calories in meat, you have to think first of all about what grade you're talking about. By and large, when you and I go to a grocery store, we do not buy prime beef. We buy either select or choice. So for the rest of this discussion, when we get to calories per ounce, we'll be talking largely about select and choice and not prime. Prime only comes into play when you and I go to a restaurant and actually buy prime beef. You can buy it at a store, but most of the time we don't. Now the second thing that's important when you're talking about any kind of meat is to understand where it came from on the animal. What is the cut, if you will? Did it come from a shoulder? Did it come from a leg? Did it come from ribs? Did it come from loins? Does it come from the butt? Wherever it was, you have to kind of know, because by and large, if the animal was using the muscle more, if it was a real active muscle like a leg or shoulder muscle, you would expect that it would end up being leaner meat. Whereas if it was a rib, some kind of a rib or a rump, it might have more fat with it. And those are just general guidelines. There are some exceptions to those rules. So that's the cut, and that's important also. And finally, you have to look at something called trim. And the trim means how much visible fat is there. And you can see in each of these pieces of meat, there is some visible fat. I actually cut this piece off to show you that we have a fairly substantial piece of fat here. And the fat, remember, is really oil, and it's 250 calories per ounce. And so if one were going to eat this piece of beef, he would not want to eat this big piece of fat with it. So when we go through calories per ounce in a few minutes, looking at different selections of meat, we'll be talking about choice or select. We'll generally be talking about whatever cut I talk about, and then we'll talk about trimmed meat that has all of the visible fat cut off. So with that, I think we'll move on to calories per ounce. Let me lay this aside. And let's begin to look at some of these meat items, thinking always about how much fat is in the meat. Now, on our first platter, we start with fishes, and at 25 calories per ounce, you can see that a great deal of the fish stays down here around 25 calories an ounce. Here we have shrimp, which is about 25 calories an ounce, and people always say, well, I've heard that shrimp has lots of cholesterol. And shrimp does have some cholesterol, more, for instance, than whitefish or haddock or one of the other items here. But shrimp is still extremely low in fat, and shrimp really has only 25 to 28 calories per ounce. So it's a very low-fat item. Crab meat sits here next to it, and crab meat is in that same general range. It may be between 25 and 30. We have some scallops here that are also between 25 and 30 calories an ounce. We have some haddock or some whitefish here that are in that same 25 to 30 calorie an ounce range. We have some oysters that are very similar. We actually have a redfish back here that gets us, or a red snapper that gets us up closer to 50 calories an ounce, and I'll move into that in a minute. Our last low-calorie item here is lobster, which is still close to 25 or 30 calories an ounce. Now, as the meat gets a little darker here, you'll see we get into some higher-fat fishes, and I've put our second sign here at 50 calories an ounce to show you that tuna, fresh tuna, right out of the ocean, and fresh salmon steaks are about 50 calories per ounce. They're darker fishes, and they're about 50 calories per ounce. Now, when you dry the tuna and you put it in water, and here I have 2 cans of tuna. One of these is tuna in water. I eat this all the time. And tuna in water, if you'll look at the labeling on it, says that it's about 35 calories per ounce. The tuna in oil, however, gets back up close to 50 calories per ounce. And actually, tuna in oil is very much like tuna right out of the ocean. It still has some oil with it. So tuna is a higher calorie fish when you catch it fresh, but when you get it in a can with water, it's one of the fairly low items that we ask patients to eat. The only higher calorie fishes than tuna and salmon are really, the only one is mackerel. Mackerel sits way up here high at 75 calories an ounce. I don't have an example of that here today. So those are the 50-calorie fishes. Now, there are a whole bunch of other meats that begin to come in around 50. And I guess the prototype that I think of here is fowl, or birds. And white meat of chicken here, we have some chicken breast. And chicken breast is all, without the skin, is actually a little lower than 50 calories an ounce. So is turkey. We have a turkey leg here. And actually, turkey leg is a little higher. It's about 50 calories an ounce. Turkey breast is actually a little lower, somewhere around 40 to 45 calories an ounce. We have some beef items that actually come in here at 50 calories an ounce. And you can see that a round steak is around 50 calories an ounce. We have a leg of lamb here. Lamb is about 50 calories an ounce. We have some pork items that come in around 50. Canadian bacon is at 50, and some real lean ham comes in at 50. I'd always thought that pork was always real high, but gee, if Canadian bacon is 50 and ham is 50, those are items we can eat, so long as we understand that the fat's cut off and they're very lean items. Up at the front, we have a chicken that has some skin on him, and the chicken with skin goes a little bit higher. It's not the same as the chicken breast, maybe closer to 60 calories an ounce. Actually, when you get to wings, you get on up to as high as 80 calories an ounce for chicken wings. So those are the items that are 50, and now let's go up to the 75s. Now 75, the prototype for me is hamburger that's grilled. Remember, we're talking about cooked weight of meat here now, not raw meat from the store, but cooked weight of meat, select or choice, with all the fat trimmed off. And hamburger is around 75 calories an ounce when it's grilled. Also here we have some lamb chops that are at 75. We have a pork shoulder that's at 75. I don't have a good example, but sirloin steaks and that type of steaks are around 75 calories an ounce. So again, you get beef items and pork items and chickens that can get as high as 75. The only chickens and birds that get to 75 are ducks. Duck is around 75 without the skin. Duck actually gets higher with its skin on. One other item I forgot to mention at 50, almost all the wild game comes in down around 50 calories an ounce, and that would include rabbit and venison, javelina, all those kinds of things that are fairly wild and spend a lot of time running through the bush. Getting back to our 75s, we have some items that I would not ordinarily have thought would be 75. All these lunch meat samples here. We have some chicken franks, we have a pimento loaf, bologna, some sort of hams and things that you and I buy. I always think of this as kind of garbage food. Actually, it's only 75 calories an ounce. Now, don't get hooked there, because the 75 calories an ounce is only because there's a lot of water in it, okay? It actually has less protein per gram, has quite a lot of fat, and it has more water, so it brings the calories down to 75 per ounce. Now let's move on up to the 100-calorie items. Obviously, we're getting more and more fat as we go on up. And here you have things that tend to be more pork. The only beef items that might get up around 100 are beef ribs and things like that are fairly inactive muscles. And I don't have any beef ribs here, but you can call beef ribs around 100. Hamburger, once you fry it, becomes 100 calories an ounce. So you can just say if you grill your hamburger and get rid of some of the fat, it's about 75. If you have fried hamburger, it would go in here with all of this stuff. Here you have some Italian sausages. You have sausage patties, sausage links, bratwurst, liverwurst, some other kinds of sausage, and some beef franks. Beef franks, and we have a pork chop. Actually, pork chops may not be quite 100 calories per ounce, but they may move down toward 80 or 85. But I put them in here because often pork chops have a lot of fat on them also. So these are the 100-calorie items. Now we move to the 125s, and they're really the things that are at 125 that I don't have here are some pork spare ribs. Pork spare ribs, and actually duck with skin on it can get as high as 125 calories per ounce. The two items I do have here are drier sausages like pepperoni and salami. These things have some of the water taken out of them, so they tend to be more concentrated. Actually, they should be about the same as liverwurst and bratwurst and that sort of stuff, but because the water is gone, they end up being somewhat higher in calories. Finally, sitting all by itself over here at 150 calories an ounce, we have our friend bacon. And you can see why bacon is 150 calories per ounce. It has a very little bit of lean stuff and lots of fat. And the truth is that bacon is one of the only meats that doesn't have relatively high protein per ounce. So bacon is kind of a no-no again for those of us who have who burn 8 times our body weight ladies or 10 times our body weight men. Most of us would not choose bacon on a daily basis because bacon is so fatty. Now the next item that's important here is to look at the protein per ounce in meat. And protein in general in our meats is all the same per ounce. Protein per ounce is 7 grams of protein per ounce in meat. 7 grams of protein per ounce. There are a few exceptions, and I'll touch on them. For instance, shrimp has 7 grams of protein per ounce, and so does tuna and salmon steaks. Therefore, the difference in those items has got to be the fat content of those items. Chicken is 7 grams of protein per ounce, whether it has the skin on it or whether it's chicken breast. Therefore, chicken breast is a little bit better item when one is comparing grams of protein with total calories. Turkey, beef, pork, almost all these items are 7 grams of protein per ounce. Now here's an exception. I told you that the luncheon meats have about 75 calories per ounce, and the reason they're lower in calories is because of the water content, and what that does is also dilute out the protein and brings it down to 5 grams of protein per ounce. So remember again that luncheon meat gives you less protein. Mothers, as you're fixing sandwiches for your kids, luncheon meat is less protein per gram because there's more water with it. All of these items have 7 grams of protein per ounce. All of these items have about 7 grams of protein per ounce. The place where we really change is up here with bacon, where you only get 2.5, possibly 3 grams of protein per ounce. Now, if a gram of protein has 4 calories, and you only have 2 grams of protein per ounce in bacon, 8 calories out of the 150 are lean meat, and the other 142 calories that you're buying are pure fat, the same as oil at 250 calories per ounce. Isn't that an amazing thing? You're buying really just 8 calories of meat, of pure protein, and the rest of it is all fat. Well, I think those are the major things I wanted to talk about in meats. There's some interesting facts about meat, and I'll kind of close with this. In general, as I said before, if the cow or the pig or whatever animal it is moves a lot, you can bet that it's going to have leaner meat in general. The wilder the animal. And so things like rabbits and venison tend to be very lean meat. They may not taste quite as good unless you mix them with fat in some form of sausage, but in general they tend to be lean animals because they move around a lot. The color of the meat is interesting. Birds and fish, as we've said, the whiter the meat, chicken breast, scallops and shellfish and things like that have very white meat when they have low calories. As you move to a darker meat, you move to higher calories. The pigs and the cows over here are just the opposite. When you're real lean, your meat will be darker, and as you move to higher calorie meats, the meats get lighter and lighter. That, of course, is because you have more fat in the meat. People have said, well, Doc, how do I calculate my fat grams in meat? Because I like to count fat grams. And here I think the easiest way is to say that every one of your meats has 7 grams of protein, except for the exceptions I've given you. 7 grams at 4 calories per gram is about 28 calories of protein. Everything else in these meats is fat. That's all that's in your meats principally, is fat and protein. You look down and you say, hey, if I squinch this in a squincher machine, I would have a little white pile of protein and a little yellow jar of oil, and that's all there is. So if you're counting fat grams, let's say, in a piece of fish that's 25 to 28 calories an ounce, you're looking at pure protein over here. Now these fishes would still be 28 calories of protein, but now would be about 22 calories of fat. You get on up into your 100-calorie items here, you're still going to have 28 calories of protein, but now you're going to have about 72 calories of fat. As I said with bacon, it's 142 calories of fat and only 8 calories of protein. The importance of all this, of course, with both the dairy products down here and the meats, is that we need, for the first time, to be very cognizant of how much oil is in the natural food as we buy it off the shelf. With grains, we add our oil to it and create masterpieces like donuts. But for a piece of beef or a piece of pork or a piece of duck or chicken or something, we buy it off the shelf, and we should view it as having a mixture of protein and fat. And those of us who burn 8 and 10 times our body weight, or those unfortunate folks who only burn 6 and 4, for whatever reason, have to be very, very smart about this stuff. And we need to learn to be creative with meats that are down here in the 25 or 30 calorie range, and with dairy products that are down there in the skim milk range, or cheeses made with skim milk. Well, that's about it for energy intake for today. We have a few other items like condiments and drinks that people will be interested in. Those will be covered in your laboratory sessions. I hope you have a good overview of these things. You have to keep practicing with them and practicing with them if you're going to get good. And hopefully we've given you a good overview and some sort of good yard markers to follow as you go to restaurants and grocery stores and pick out food items. Thanks again. We'll see you next session.